High school student visits prison, catches inmates in the act. He was cornered, stuck between the back of the door and the wall. His heart pounded as he hoped he wouldn't get caught. Listening intently, his breathing slowed. He didn't want to think about what would happen if they knew he was there. Suddenly, his eyes grew wide and his stomach dropped. He had to act fast. 18-year-old Cyan Green was in his final grade in high school. He was a quiet student with good grades. No one ever had a problem with him, until now. Cy was attending Palma School, one of the most elite high schools in the Californian state. He moved there in second grade, as his parents wanted him to keep out of trouble, but that wasn't the case. Everyone there came from privileged backgrounds, but Cy was different. His parents worked hard to afford the monthly tuition of $1,200 so that he could go there and be surrounded by better friends who had their heads screwed on tight. Unlike Cy's old school friends who got caught up in drugs and theft. They hoped Cy would make smarter decisions by going to Palma School, but the unexpected happened. The school had more programs than most. One of which was the Reading Group program with Soledad State Prison. It was introduced as a form of correctional training for the prisoners and young boys, but it veered off course. Although many parents didn't like the idea, Cy's parents saw it as a good opportunity to remind their son to stay on the right path. When Cy first met the prisoners, it was a nerve-wracking and unsettling meeting, to say the least. The men were intimidating and hardened by their mistakes and life behind bars. They greeted all the schoolboys with an intense stare and domineering presence. Cy wondered why they enrolled in the program. Was it just to scare them? As the weeks passed and Cy began to get to understand the program and the inmates a little bit better, he started to relax. He was no longer afraid to speak up and talk with them without avoiding eye contact and lowering his head to the ground. He was one of the first students to actually form a bond with them, or so he thought. As far as Cy knew, they were all friends, which was why he didn't understand once they began to act differently towards him. At first, he thought it was nice when they asked about him, where he came from and his family, but now, something felt odd. The more Cy told them, the more coy and suspicious they began to act. Cy reminded himself that these men were criminals after all. He didn't dare to ask them what they were charged for. He was afraid of their answers. It was a dark moment when Cy realized that he really didn't know these men, and they knew so much about him. Maybe the other students kept their distance for a reason which was now becoming clear. It was just a feeling, but he knew it was true. They were talking about him. He watched them stare at him from a distance as they talked amongst themselves. When he'd ask what they were talking about, they'd reply nothing with a smirk. Cy could tell they were planning something, but he could never have imagined what. As the group's recess bell rang and Cy's classmates began to mess around the gym hall where the reading group took place, Cy left the hall quietly to go to the bathroom. But just before he was about to leave again, he heard heavy footsteps coming towards him. Instinct told him to hide. He jumped behind the open door as a group of inmates walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was cornered, stuck between the wall and the back of the door. He had no choice but to stay still and hope he didn't get caught. He listened with wide eyes as the inmates talked about him. They had been planning it for weeks, hoping to catch him off guard. His heart pounded as he stepped out from behind the door. He walked up to them. "Are you serious?" The inmates were surprised to see him. They wanted to be the ones to surprise him. "We already talked to your principal, Cy. It's a done deal." Cy broke down in tears and gave the men a hug when they told him that they had gathered enough money for a scholarship for Cy. They had learned of Cy's background and his father's current health issues that meant he wouldn't be able to afford to keep Cy in Palma School for the remainder of his final year. The inmates really valued their time with the school kids and wanted to give back to the school and the program that had helped them out a lot and gave them something to look forward to. But how did they raise the money? They work for 8 cents an hour in prison, so they had to be creative. However, one inmate gave Cy his entire monthly savings. They raised the remaining money through other donations and fundraisers. In the end, they had raised $30,000 for Cy's family to see him through high school. Cy graduated with top grades and used the rest of the money to go on to college and study sports broadcasting. He was eternally grateful to the inmates and kept in touch with them. Thanks to the inmates' hard work, Cy was able to stay on the right path in life and make his parents proud. What a wonderful example of kindness. Thank you for watching this fantastic story. Please tap one of the 2 videos on your screen for another amazing Wonder Stories.